Oh no, I forgot to unmute my mic after the last break, so I have to read that sentence a third time. So there is no coincidence that there is a rise in the states that have proposed voter suppression laws. So it started once the gap between voter turnout became so obviously, racially classified between the right and the left, with the gap being smaller and voter turnout at a record high after the 2008 election. With that high turnout, they enacted these new laws. Some have passed, while others have not. And of course, like we spoke about before the break and before I had to record this sentence a third time for some reason, they're doing this for clear reasons. I'm sick and tired of talking about it. We're going to talk about burnout, because I'm experiencing it this very second. The 5 states with the highest rates of voter turnout in 2008 were, and we're going to explain a little bit of interesting facts about each one of these states. So Minnesota proposed legislation and a constitutional amendment that would prevent already registered voters from voting unless they provide a government-issued photo ID with a current address. Many people do not have updated addresses from maybe their parents' home, or they're away currently in school. This affected those people. This was in 2011, leading up to the famous 2012 election cycle as well. So then we lead into Wisconsin. More recently, this year, Daniel Kelly, a conservative justice on the state Supreme Court, lost his seat to Jill Karofsky, a liberal challenger, by more than... I'm so weird at reading numbers. So I don't know why I can't read that number. A lot of numbers. While the Supreme Court seat was decided last year, literally by only 6,000 votes. So there's a lot of effort being put there more recently to suppress their votes, because we showed up, okay? We showed up this year, and they're like, oh my gosh, they're doing it, and I don't want it. There are efforts proposed by the Republicans to suppress at-home voting, thinking that if they reduce resources or make the lines really long, that people would just stay home. And it turns out they did. And they voted against them at home in record numbers. Literally, the gap was so large, I had trouble reading it because I'm a dyslexic weirdo that has trouble with numbers. So now there is a conversation created almost artificially by this. Is voting from home safe? As if George Bush himself didn't literally promote the shit out of it in 2004. For military people. Leads us into Maine. Yet again, more recently, and targeting out the demographic, not just Democrats. It's like they're carving out an entire demographic of people. This bill would require increased scrutiny of voters who list a college dorm as their residence. So college students who live in Maine have the right to vote in Maine, and that should not be subject to different laws than anyone else. So if you live in Maine, you should be able to vote in Maine. But they made a law that if you have a ID that says you don't live in Maine, then guess you don't actually live in Maine. Idiots. You thought you lived in Maine, and then you worked in Maine, and then you sleep in Maine every day. No. So legislators should definitely vote no on LD 155. So it's a bad law. Speaking of bad laws, we got New Hampshire. And we spoke about the efforts in New Hampshire pretty recently, but let's, with that being said, they're all just one example, not the entire story of all these things and these working pieces to go on to suppress the vote. Especially, they're strategically suppressing the votes in places that are vulnerable to, party splitting. and going from maybe right to left. That's the only real places they're doing it. Colorado, only 5 states all have all male voting systems, and Colorado is one of those states. There are only 211 days until the general election at the time that I wrote this article. The November election is on the 3rd. Colorado is one of the states that has ready, easily accessible voting because of the funding and accessibility that they have. They have a lot of resources they can pull from. They have lots of machines. They both have machines. They both have the paper. They have everything. They're not reliant on just one aspect of voting. They're also not reliant on one aspect of funding as well. That's why voter turnout is always so good in Colorado, and that's why it's always so easy. And the people in Colorado are much like the people in Canada, where they're like, why would I have a problem with voting? It's only going to be like an hour. People in the South, people in Georgia are like, I do not want to go back there. If you make me go back there, I will cut you. So all 5 of these states that we talked about introduced voter suppression laws, though some passed, some fall on their face. It just kind of depends on how many votes the bills get. So you vote for the people who write and pass bills, and those bills propose bills. So those people propose bills to make it harder for you to vote for them, or in essence, for you to vote them out. It's not about your safety at this point or fraud. It's kind of about their power and keeping their power away from you as regular schmuck voters who might actually not live in Maine, which is a crime. I don't care if you don't believe me, because this is my show, and I'm just, these are my thoughts, and you can make your own show with your own thoughts, with your own logic, and your own facts. Voter suppression after record voter turnout in 2008. More than 30 states actually introduced voter suppression legislation in 2011. 16 states actually passed such measures. So, let's imagine a world. Yeah, okay. A lot of people voted. Great. That must be a lie. It's fraud. It's fake. Like, what? Democracy, right? Am I right? It's hard to go back and relive all of this for you as I watched all of these conversations unfold in real time as if there was an actual problem with this record turnout and that there's something that needed to be done about it. So the conversation about voter fraud is fairly new. Now, there is countless acts of actual voter fraud, and there are lots of acts of credit card fraud too, but the government doesn't ban credit cards. Like we just trust in the system that we've created to investigate and prosecute credit card fraud. Yeah, sure, it happens, but the people that do it are most likely caught, at least hopefully. The perpetrators aren't put on a public database for you to look through though, but that would be as remarkably resourceful for the public. So take a gander without really looking at every single instance of voter fraud in this convenient PDF created by the United States government and many other PDFs of similar nature, databases of similar nature, without looking at every single instance of voter fraud that has happened since 2004. The majority are poll workers mishandling information, or instances where a citizen was unaware that they were breaking or committing fraud, such as being in possession of someone else's ballot or assisting someone else to fill out their ballot. This is actually kind of funny because I was looking for a few hours actually at this database. It's quite interesting to see how many mothers are on this list, along with those pleading guilty. They plead guilty, yes, because they're guilty. They realize, I committed fraud. Doesn't mean I committed fraud. Like, I want to bring down democracy as we know it. No, like, they understand they did something wrong and they're not going to do it again. And that wrong thing happened to be helping their disabled peer vote, or maybe helping their son do it for the first time, or looking where they shouldn't be looking, doing something they shouldn't be doing. And it's not that deep, bro, okay? So why this is so important to have, well-regulated, well-organized polling stations with trained staff on a very centralized level with federal funding, or at least a nice flow of funding that keeps everybody on the same page, keeps everyone well informed about what they should and shouldn't be looking at, and then we'd probably have a lot less instances of voter fraud instead of making more regulations that will, in essence, create more instances of voter fraud, because you make a law, right? People aren't breaking that law before you make it, and then you make the law, and then people start breaking the law, and then you're like, oh my gosh, we have all this crime, but we didn't have that crime before you made the law. If you catch what I mean. So if these thousands, millions of cases of voter fraud are related to absentee ballots, why are we saying they're so safe? Why am I being like, hey, go vote from home, commit some fraud? Why? Well, why do you think that it's unsafe? What makes you think that? Where did you get that idea? A lot of these cases happened, back in 2004 and onward, and we've had a conversation kind of revolving around the boogeyman of fraud. So fraud, as a general term, is not a scary word. It's a category of crime. There are countless instances of insurance fraud. And how do we solve that? We didn't get rid of insurance, so we can't just make it really hard for people to get insured, because first of all, obviously, it's important for people to get insured for things, and elections are also important for people to vote in. There are also huge capitalist empires where money equals speech that are inhibiting our free access to free and fair elections. But I'm not talking about that, are we? We're just talking about the for voter fraud of the potential illegal immigrants that might be living in Maine, that might not actually be from Maine. Sorry, I'm just really on the Maine thing, because mainly it's just weird. So close to Canada, I just can't imagine all these Canadians coming in requesting an absentee ballot to vote. Ooh, that's not what we're doing, okay? There's people that live and work in other states that, God. I digress. In the US, a campaign is financed by donations, contributions, PACs, and firms meant to fund and ensure the success of the campaign. When these resources of wealth all have an idea, maybe to preserve their electoral power, maybe that's their collective idea, limiting access to voting for people likely to vote against them is a very simple strategy, but it's not as foolproof as they once thought. It's actually working to drive up engagement in a lot of these states due to bored Canadians like me telling you voting is very easy experience once you actually get there and actually do it. It's never really too far away from home, because now you can vote from home just like you can work from home and eat from home and do all these other things from home. You just got to make sure that you get your freaking ballot on time, because this is what we're talking about. There's so many barriers in place to get you away from where you want to be, and you don't want to be trapped in that, now do you? No, you don't. So register. On the edge, make it thick and stuff. Through the night, make it so much love.